In this video, we're going to talk about how Crafter CMS helps organizations achieve a much higher rate of innovation for their digital experiences by solving major technology and process issues found with traditional CMS platforms that make it difficult for content authors, operations, and developers to work together without interference and friction. We solve these issues with native support for DevContentOps and our code-forward content-back process. Fast-moving, innovative companies leverage agile development practices and continuous integration and delivery, or what is known as CI/CD practices, to create and deliver new functionality quickly and continuously. So successful are these practices in the realm of typical application development that we've begun to organize our resources and teams around this model. Devops is a perfect example of this. Devops is a reorganization of the traditional separate roles of developers and operations into a new consolidated concept that leverages skills, process, and technology to solve pain points that have existed between development and operations that make delivering innovation at speed and scale very difficult. Through the creation of the DevOps concept, developers are now deeply integrated into the deployment, operations, and monitoring process. This leads to learning that drives better software development and removes the friction and pain points that exist in a traditional model where developers created software in isolation and then threw it over a wall for a systems team to deploy, operate, and maintain. The challenge in the digital experience space for innovative companies is that for a variety of reasons, newer, faster models for development don't seem to work very well. Digital experience projects introduce a third constituent, content authors, who have a work product that's deeply connected to the software SDLC, but has a life cycle of its own. This creates a tremendous amount of friction and a number of pain points for both content authors and DevOps in the form of content freezes, overly complicated process, and scalability issues. Getting production content back to lower environments to support the development lifecycle is extremely difficult with traditional content management platforms. This slows down the development process. It's also difficult to move production features through the lower environments and up into the production CMS. With traditional CMS platforms, it's very difficult to take advantage of modern DevOps tools and process, including automation, branching, and other modern source code management and collaboration practices, or lightweight local development. Traditional CMS doesn't apply well on the operations side either. These systems tend to be difficult to scale and are not typically deployable using modern, cloud-native, and serverless practices that make operating, monitoring, and scaling systems easier and more cost-effective. The vast majority of these pain points exist because content management as a platform, as a technology, as a process, and as a constituent sit outside of the DevOps concept and its tools and processes. The reason it's so difficult to integrate these modern agile development practices and tools into our content management and digital experience space is pretty straightforward. And the reason is that the traditional platforms that we rely on to help content authors deliver digital experiences were built over 20 years ago and have a 20-year-old architecture based on SQL databases and JCR repositories that are simply not designed to keep up with today's rate of innovation and the kinds of scalability and deployment needs that we have today. The storage platforms are silos that make environments islands that are extremely difficult to keep in sync with one another. Elastic scalability is not built into the architecture, and the development frameworks and tools are legacy-based. To put that into context, when the architecture for most CMS platforms in use by companies today were invented, the Backstreet Boys were at the top of the charts, the iMac was the most popular personal computer, Bill Clinton had only recently left office, Nokia was the most popular cell phone, and the battle for the browser was between Netscape and IE. What we need instead is a completely new architecture that removes the silos and fits directly into today's agile development and DevOps-led model, and that brings together all three of the constituents for CMS: authors, developers, and operations. A major part of the solution is Crafter's Git-based content and code workflow and automation support. We call our code-forward content-back process. In Crafter, authors work in their production authoring environment to create and manage content in Crafter Studio and then approve and publish it to their dynamic content delivery engines. To support technical innovations such as new features and integrations, DevOps teams have to maintain multiple environments, and these environments can vary from one organization to another. In this case, we have 3 environments: a local developer's machine, an integration or dev team environment, and a QA environment. Crafter is going to allow us to use Git-based repository mechanics and workflow automation to easily move code forward from the lower development environments up to production without incurring a content freeze for authors. Crafter is also going to make it very easy for us to bring production content back to lower environments to support innovation through the same Git-based workflow mechanics. The combination of Crafter's APIs, automation, and Crafter's use of Git-based distributed repository and workflow mechanics, along with modern cloud-native deployment models, integrates content authors into the agile creative process to create a new concept, DevContentOps. DevContentOps allows content authors and DevOps to work seamlessly without any friction or pain points. New innovation in the form of code can continuously be moved forward into the production authoring environment and published to delivery without interrupting authoring processes. And content created in production can easily be moved back to lower development environments to support the innovation process. To illustrate the code-forward, content-back process, let's look at a simple real-world example. We'll start with production authoring. Authors use Crafter Studio, a web-based application, to create and manage content. This content is written to a local Git repository underneath Crafter Studio. Development teams often use Git-based source control and development collaboration environments such as GitHub, GitLab, and others. In our example here, we see a distributed repository relationship with the production authoring environment where authors work and a GitHub project and repository where development teams work. Standard DevOps automation like Jenkins is used to call Crafter APIs and seamlessly sync production content updates on an immediate or regular basis back to GitHub and the development team with no interruptions to the authoring team. DevOps can then branch the development repository to allow many parallel teams to work on features independently. The flow of content updates can be managed at each branch. Branching and standard Git flow are the key to Agile and CI/CD practices. Further, we can see that each developer can fork the project within GitHub, allowing them to work independently of their teammates on a specific feature. Lastly, we see that developers can create their own local clone of the repository. This allows them to work locally on their own machine with their own tools, including IDEs, inline debuggers, and other tools that make them fast and productive. With traditional CMS, this kind of workflow is nearly impossible because the burden of keeping things in sync is simply too great. Now let's look at code forward. Once a developer has completed and tested a unit of work locally, they push the work up to GitHub and then create a pull request. The lead for the feature can then review the work and decide whether or not to merge it. As feature teams complete their work, it can be merged into develop and release branches, which can then be easily moved via automation and Git mechanics to lower test environments to complete the code certification process. Once a release is tested, DevOps can then merge those changes into the master branch with a push of a button. Once code changes are in the GitHub master branch, automation picks them up and moves them to the production authoring environment, where the team can do a final review before pushing the new functionality live. At the touch of a button or via APIs, the team can publish the new functionality live anywhere in the world. Delivery servers, which are a clone of the published repository, pick up the changes automatically, regardless of where they're located. Deployment to large and elastic infrastructures is no challenge at all for Crafter CMS. Now let's look at a quick demo.
For context, I'm going to show you a couple things. I'm going to open up a couple browsers here so you can see I've got 2 browsers. They're colored so you can see the difference. And there are 2 different URLs. So if I put them side by side, you'll see that all of this is happening locally, but I'm setting up a scenario where one server is running, which is my production, my authoring environment. Okay, so that's that first environment we looked at. And then here on this port 8080 is my development environment, which is all the way at the bottom of the diagram that we saw. I'm working locally as a developer in this repository. And I'm going to show you how we flow changes from this environment to this environment through GitHub. Okay? So the first thing is we're going to log into each of these environments. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, the admin user here. And you can see here I've got lots of different sites in my environment. And the site that I'm interested in for today's demo is this flow site. As an author, I'm in here and I'm looking at my site and I'm ready to make some changes. Okay. Now, as a developer, I also have an environment running on my local machine, and I'm going to log into that. Now, there's a different set of sites here locally that I'm running, but I am also running this flow site on top of a repository that is basically connected to this production repository through Git-based workflow. Okay, and you can see at the moment I have the same site. This is really what I'm trying to show you here. Same articles, same content. And we're going to start working as the authors in our production environment. So we're going to make a couple simple changes. This isn't a full Crafter CMS authoring demo, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on features. I'm just going to make a couple simple edits as a content author because that's our first use case. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn on in-context editing. You can see here I've got different pencils throughout the UI here where I can click on something if I want to edit it and make a change. So let's say I want to change maybe this text here and go ahead and say edit the content that's driving this area. So I'm going to say, and we'll just keep it really obvious, update for webinar demo, okay? And we'll change this other headline to check it out, okay? And let's go ahead and maybe change the, image here. So let's see if we go to, I'm going to click edit, for example, so you can see another type of editing here. And here you see some of the image pickers. And let's just change one of these images here. So I'm going to choose just an image on my drive. We'll pick something that's kind of humorous to one that doesn't fit as well. These avatars here, like this guy here, kind of interesting. Go with this guy. Okay, upload that, and you can see there it is, and I'm going to say save. And there's a couple of different asset versions there, but for my resolution, this is the image that's going to show. As we would scale it, we would pick up that other image. If I go back to the developer instance that I'm running, and I hit refresh, okay, nothing's changed on the navigation. The content's still the same. The image here is still the same. Everything's still the same. I'm working in my own local environment.
Now from the production environment, we're going to perform a content back operation.
Git push, okay, and because this has a relationship with that Git repository, I'm pushing that content up to that repository. Now if I refresh here, you see these changes. Just a few minutes ago I made these changes, right? Okay, now on the developer's machine, what's happened? If I refresh, do I see my change? No, of course not, because my development machine is its own local instance, and the content is up in the central repository, which I'm a part of, but I'm my own local clone. So what I need to do as in my local environment is jump over. So I'm going to pull all the changes that we made. Again, this can all be done by either my local developer tools if I'm a developer, or by automation if I'm talking about environments like QA and so on. So you can see all the changes that we made from an authoring perspective. And if I go in here at this point now and refresh, guess what? In my developer environment, I have the production content. Okay? And so I can choose, even as a team lead, how often my team gets production content, right? So I could be flowing that content into the master repository, but I don't have to bring my team's branch up to date unless I want to. So I have complete control over where content goes and when it goes there. Okay, now my developer's up to date. I want to do some development and push it back in the other direction. So we're going to do some really simple development. When I click edit here, you'll see I've added two fields down here at the bottom. Let's put some numbers in here, say 5 and 6, values A and B, and I'm going to save these. And I'm going to show you where those come from just so you have some context. So if I want to change the content model, which is what's driving these entry values down here, A and B, where did they come from? Let's go into sidebar. Let's go to site config and content types, open existing, and we want to look at the article type. Okay, here's the schema of the content model. It's a drag and drop interface, and this is really the one thing that I really see developers using the Studio tool for locally, just to help build content types. It's just a drag and drop interface. And you certainly can modify these things with local tools, but this just makes it easy. And ultimately, it just gets to be files written into your Git repo. But here I've added an input box called A, an input box called B. They're simple input fields. And now, if I want to use those values to create some kind of business logic, in Studio, I could go to Preview Tools. I could go to this page controller and say, hey, I want to run some logic against this content every time this page is viewed. And I can modify this code here in this tool, but I don't want to because it's good for a quick edit, but it's not the way as a developer I want to work. Where I want to work is in my tools. So I like IntelliJ here. So when I could be using Eclipse, IntelliJ, any standard editor is going to work for you. So I'm basically going to go in here and I'm going to say, let's uncomment this code. And I'm going to explain it quick. I'm basically getting the content model value A, getting them value B. I'm summing them up together, and I'm going to put them into the template model so that I can use that value. Let's run this controller. Okay, so it's running. The issue is there's nothing showing up on the screen because Crafters is an MVC pattern. It very cleanly separates your content from your business logic and your presentation. They're all sort of separate things, and they're stored separately, maintained separately, and so on. We've modified the content model. We've modified the data that is in that content model by editing our form and adding our values. And we've modified our controller to take those values and sum them up. Now we want to present that. If I look here, you can see I'm adding it to the template model, and I'm calling it demo sum. If I go to my template, which is a free marker template, this is what's driving my presentation. So if you look at this markup, basically we have a header, we've got a footer in here, and we're basically showing from the content model the title and the article body. Well, if we look at the page, pretty simple. Here's the title, here's the article body, right? Okay, so going back to that, if I want to take that sum and print it out, let's say we want to print it out right here next to the title. So we'll do pipe, and then we want to print out the sum. We do it like that. We tell free marker, hey, dump out the value of sum right here. Okay, if I save that and I go back here and run this, I can now see that value, right? And now I can use content to change those values. So it's 11 now because I'm adding 5 and 6, but I could change that to 5 and 5. And now it's 10. So now I've given my authors the ability to, amazingly sum these two numbers together and print it out in their title. That's impressive, I know. Now, maybe I want to see if I want to walk through this code and I want to see if there are any bugs, right? So if things were a little bit more complex, I might have bugs. So maybe I want to put a breakpoint on something. Again, I go to my preview, I say refresh. Guess what? I can see the values coming out. I can walk through this code, okay? And this is a very simple controller, but just like any Java-based application, I can have class structures. I can have spring beans that are wired to each other. I can have filters. And other kinds of interceptors. I can have scheduled jobs. This is a full application development framework, very easy to develop on. And because I can do complex things on it, I need to be able to use real tools to be able to debug things and make sure that things work. Once I'm convinced that my work is complete, what I need to do is I need to get that work back up to production. So I could do this through the command line, or I could do it through my tools. Let's do it through the tools. So here I could say right-click, and in this case I want to commit everything. So I'm going to basically go to Git here and say commit directory. It's going to say, here's all the changes that you made. I can review those things. I can leave a comment and so on, and I'm just going to go ahead and say commit. And it says, okay, we got a bunch of things we want you to fix, and I can say, yeah, that's good, or review it, or whatever. And now I've committed those things, and they're still committed locally, and then I can basically flow those up. So again, I can do that through right-click and Git and do my sort of repository options here, so push and pull and so on, or I can go to the command line, and I'll just kind of keep both of these. So I'm going to say Git push, and that's going to push this work up to that Git repository, that flow training repository that I showed you earlier. So let's jump back to that now. We go here, and I can see now my last commit was just a few seconds ago, and that code is there. The fact is that the work is in Git still, and I haven't used automation to bring it to my authoring environment. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go command line, and I'm going to go to that repository, and I'm going to say Git pull, and here you're going to see my development assets, all the things that I changed, the Groovy and the free marker flow into that authoring environment into that safe editing sandbox where I can now see my work and see the change and test here and then ultimately approve and go live with that. Or, again, I could have automation push the code changes live if I want. So the workflow options and exactly what that workflow looks like is completely up to you, but you get a sense of just how easy this is, to move this code and this content between environments.
This concludes our segment on DevContentOps and Code Forward Content Back. Thank you and happy crafting.